Welcome to the Session X podcast. In this episode, I sit down with Jason Slezak, an absolute legend in the world of kiteboarding. Over the last 20 years, Jason has been responsible for thousands of people learning to kiteboard, introducing this beautiful, life-changing sport to so many people. This is a really special conversation for me as Jason and I dive deep into the application of kiteboarding to everyday life. I hope this conversation is as inspirational to you as it was for me. I've been obsessed with action sports my entire life. A single universal language of pure stoke. In these timeless moments, we experience the greatest joys and purest emotions. Life makes sense, completely present, in harmony with nature. In studying the evolution of extreme sports, it's easy to identify a direct link to ultimate human performance, monk-like focus, body and mind mastery, mind-blowing applications of courage, confidence, and creativity. But where does it come from? How do we get it? And most importantly, how can more people access these superhuman qualities? My name is Matt Schollard. I'm a peak performance and mindset coach, and I'm also an extreme athlete. Together with some of the greatest action sport professionals on earth, we'll drop into the powerful lessons found within their chosen disciplines and explore how you can apply them toward your own journey of greatness. Welcome to Session X Podcast, the intersection of extreme sports and peak performance. Bro, it is an honor to welcome Jason Slezak. Now, there's various levels of legend. I'm going to crank you up to like turbo legend. Real Watersports, absolute ninja. You are personally responsible for what, thousands of people learning to kiteboard. Patagonia,
over the years, for sure.
Patagonia ambassador, globetrotter, wave kite extraordinaire, savage waterman, and good friend, Jason Slezak. Welcome, brother.
Thanks for having me. Super stoked to be here to chat with you. And really love the podcast and what you're doing with the whole program.
Yeah, flattery is going to get you far, man. Like I tell that to everybody. Like the more you can like stroke me up in the process. Man, well, as you know, like the core thesis of my whole program with Session X and with this podcast is I've been fascinated with this idea of the intersection of extreme sports. We can also replace action and adventure sports as, you know, an alternate nomenclature for it. But this idea of an extreme sport being the catalyst for ultimate human potential and peak performance. What I really am fascinated to explore with you is, one, you were a coach at Real Watersports for the most pivotal years of kiteboarding's growth, which is incredible. You have taught people to kite, one, through the most tumultuous years of kiteboarding on
That's for sure.
the savage death gear. But you also introduced these life-changing practices and modalities to so many people. So like, start us out, man. What was your journey? How did you end up becoming a kiteboarding coach? And then I really want to start peeling back the onion on what you witnessed when you would teach these people and how you were personally responsible for probably making so many people's lives more fruitful, wonderful, rewarding, and fulfilling. So take us back, brother.
Part of me, I feel like, was being in the right place at the right time. I was sort of still in college and spending my summers in Cape Hatteras, on Hatteras Island, Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And I just happened to move there in the summer of 1999. The sort of late summer, fall of 1998 were when the first kites sort of came to North Carolina. So Trip Foreman, who's one of the owners of Real, a guy named Ty Luckett, who's still just a legend, fisherman, kite coach that still lives down there. A guy named Joe Toner, who unfortunately is no longer with us, who has passed in more recent years. And then Trip's wife at the time ordered kites from Maui, ordered, Whippica, two-line, free airs, or whatever they were at the time. They were all windsurfers. They lived in a windy place. They worked in the wind sport industry, and they ordered these kites. So, that was in the late summer, fall of 98. Fast forward to the next spring.
How old were you then?
Let's see, I was 21.
Okay.
Yeah, 21 at the time. And, fast forward to the next spring, I just happened to move, to want to spend a summer in Hatteras. And at the time I worked for a surf shop, windsurf shop, beach store, kayak rentals, umbrellas, chairs, beach cruisers, whatever. And part of my job, part of one of the many jobs I have is like delivering some of this stuff. So I'd be in like the little company van and I'd look at these guys and there'd be these funny looking kites in the air. And at that point, like, you know, big windsurf boards and they're like just going downwind, right? They're still kind of just figuring it out. And I kind of look and I'm like, that's a little weird, you know, but like each day I'd see them, like, well, it would be like more intriguing, right? It was like this little pull.
What was your primary discipline at the time?
At the time, and why I wanted to be there was surfing.
Okay.
You know, I grew up not near the ocean, but I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so southwestern Pennsylvania. But my parents, you know, we would do like a summer trip to the beach, right? And even in more recent years, I found some old photo albums and found this like, you know, sort of my first trip to the beach. I was born in March. They took me to the beach in the summer, said I just wouldn't leave the beach. The next year when I could walk, my dad said we showed up. I just ran to the water, ran right in. They had to run after me and like I wouldn't leave the ocean, right? And I can truly remember from the earliest days like this pull, you know, whatever, you know, all of us feel it in some way, this pull to the ocean, right? Like I was obsessed. I would, you know, dream of surfing and bodyboarding and just being in the ocean and feeling the swell. And like at that time, you know, there was no like X Games, there was no whatever, but there would be like in the area I lived in, they would play like the Huntington Beach surf contest or like the California surf contest at like 2 in the morning. And I would wake up and sneak out in elementary school and like with the sound off and like watch these surf contests when I was supposed to be sleeping, you know, weird little things like that. That was just this like draw to the ocean.
Yeah.
And then, but I was you know, started skiing at the age of 3 and, you know, BMX by the age of 5 or 6 and BMX racing. And then I had a slightly older cousin who was really into skateboarding, taught me how to skateboard, you know, maybe when I was 5 or 6 or so. So this was like my way of sort of experiencing this sort of surfing was like skating around with my friends. And, you know, so there was always this sort of action sports component of my life.
Yeah.
And so, you know, sort of right out of late high school, college, I really put my head down and wanted to learn how to surf. I made some friends in college who were surfers. We would go to either the New Jersey coast or the Maryland coast or the North Carolina coast. And I was a very poor surfer, you know, but like poor meaning just not that good, right? But passionate.
Passion, yeah.
And so at the time I was living in like Ocean City, Maryland in the summer with really not that great surf, saving all this money to go to Hatteras for these trips. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to move there and like commit to surfing.
Nice.
But the little caveat is at about age 7 for Christmas, my dad got me a controllable kite, like just a stunt kite, 2 handles, little weird frame, you know, and he had one. And when we would go to parks or the beach or whatever, we would fly these stunt kites basically.
Yeah.
And it was something I loved to do with him. It was like, you know, what we would sort of just do. And so when I started seeing the Trip and these guys early on kiting in Hatteras, I was like, well, I know how to fly the kite and I wakeboard and snowboard and surf. And I was like, there's these components that I feel like I have, right? But at the time I was a 21-year-old college student that was broke. So I was like, not going to be able to do this. Fast forward to August of 1999. So I'd only been in Hatteras for a couple months. I went to a trade show in Salt Lake City, Utah. And there happened to be a tornado that hit the trade show. It forced all these small brands into the hallways of the bigger convention hall. You know, some people were injured. It was a really traumatic, kind of tumultuous experience. However, it forced a really small brand at the time called Slingshot into the hallways. Slingshot, who's, you know, is a local brand here in Hood River and a kiteboarding, you know, powerhouse. At that point, they were distributing FlexiFoil foil kites from the UK. They made boards, backpacks, and basically control bars because FlexiFoils came with handles. And I met Jeff Lagauche at a booth. I was just sitting there kind of bored as my boss at the time wrote like a order for some sort of water shoe booty to protect your feet for windsurfing lessons. And I can remember just staring at this TV with this video on loop of all the guys at Kite Beach in Maui, like Lou and Elliot, and so Lou Wayman, Elliot LeBeau, Mauricio Abreu, all like the kind of godfathers of like the wake style movement.
Austin.
Yeah, but doing these like powered wake tricks, and I was like, what I saw in Hatteras were these guys on these big boards, kind of cruising in the sound, and then all of a sudden I saw these guys jumping and flipping, and I was like, okay, like sparked this interest that was way greater.
Yeah,
because I didn't realize
because you saw the potential.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was like a thing, right? I just saw these guys like kind of going back and forth. I'm like, that looks okay.
Yeah.
But like wasn't this magnetic draw, you know? And I talked to Jeff Lagosche, and it was the final day of the trade show, and he's like, you know what? Like I have this one kite left. You live in Cape Hatteras. I've been there. It's super windy. Like take this home and try it and let me know what you think. And he basically just put a kite into my hands. So I went from like, I can't afford this and I can't do it, to like somebody just handed me, it was like the golden ticket, like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. And they're like, I like flew home with this thing and immediately went home and had to fabricate a bar. Like it came with handles, and I was like, well, I watched these guys in this video, they weren't using handles. So like cut down an old windsurfing boom that I found in like the dumpster out back of our shop, cut the straight part down, fabricated a bar, went out to the beach arrogantly with like a wakeboard, boots and bindings in the ocean. And I was like, I'm going to go kiteboarding.
I'm kiteboarding.
Yeah. And immediately had a roommate at the time, launched the kite, and not knowing anything, our girlfriends came with us, and a cooler and some chairs. And so we set them down, and he went downwind and I went upwind, and they were in the middle. And I'm like, throw it up. And, immediately got ripped like 15 feet in the air, slammed down, knocked both girls over, both beach chairs, cooler, and, face covered in sand, sand up my nose, sand in my ear. And I just looked at him and I was like, do that again. And so we just proceeded to like hot launch this thing. Yeah, like for an hour. And I was like, this is the best thing ever. I'd fly into the air, get drugged down the beach, tumble around, crash, do it over again. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready. Let's go in the ocean. And I put the board on and I made it maybe 2 feet and got tumbled in the shore break, and the kite went down, and I'm now stuck in a board. And I was like, okay, this is going to take a little bit more than just this like one day. So like humbled, enamored with the power, and just was like, this is it. And then from that day, it took a long time and a lot of frustration. Like, one, it was a foil kite that didn't water relaunch, my makeshift bar, my leader lines would only last like 10 or 15 minutes before they would break because of my poor craftsmanship. And my solution to that was let them break, walk. Well, luckily Hatteras is very shallow, walk back in, I'd make multiple sets of leader lines. I'd get like 15 to 20 minutes before my session would be over, refabricate, go back out, so all this stuff, I'd throw the gear away because I would be so frustrated. Then I'd wake up and be like, I don't really want to throw it away. Go out to the trash can. That was like my trash can at the end of the driveway. Take it back out and be like, okay, I'll try this again. And then proceeded to just sort of go along that path. So I was there sort of as a surfer, sea kayak tour guide, because I was a whitewater kayaker at the time. But this thing like immediately kind of drew me into the sport. And in the wintertime, I was teaching skiing and snowboarding, and I was a passionate skier and snowboarder at the time. And what I had found immediately when I went to college to like try to make money in the winter, I was teaching at this really small ski resort. I noticed that as I coached, I got much better. I was having to break down these movements where like I was a skier and I was a snowboarder and I had friends that skied and snowboard, but we didn't really talk about progression. It was just something we did.
Right.
And we were getting better, but you're getting better like incrementally. And then all of a sudden, when I had to break down these fundamental movements of like, subtle toe, heel movements, flexion of the board, torsional flex, how shoulders and hips and everything articulate, even to little kids, because we would run some kids camps, they would learn, I would get better. And so when I started kiteboarding, I immediately knew that my path to my progression was by helping other people learn.
Yeah.
Because if I had to change my teaching style or learn a movement or break down a movement so that I could relay it to somebody else, my understanding and fundamentals got better and better and better.
Absolutely. In special operations, there's a phrase: see one, do one, teach one. So that's kind of like the learning process. Like you first observe it, you watch it, then you actually do it, and then to really reinforce those neural circuits, you have to actually teach it. So that's a huge part of any type of physical, hand-eye coordination, active learning environment.
For sure. Like, there's instinctual things that we do. And when you learn something, you immediately almost start cataloging those things as, that's sort of learning in itself,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Like you have to think about it and you have to think about it intensely. And then there's a point where you're just doing, right? And some people, that's as much as they really like think it through, not in a good or bad way. Like, and they get better experientially, like you said, by watching others, by whatever, but by having to sort of really fundamentally break it down, I just knew that would help with my progression. And, back to what you were saying about that sort of, sharing the sport with people. At that time, there wasn't a lot of good instruction. Like I didn't have the ability to go take lessons when I learned. And so we wanted to be able to share that. And at the same time,
even before YouTube, kids.
Yeah, it's before the internet.
This is the 1900s we're talking about.
This is back in the 1900s. There was no kiteboarding instruction. No, there just really wasn't like that sort of instructional path. So wanting to share that with others, but then, meeting Matt Nuzzo, who's one of the owners of REAL, and Trip Foreman. This was again before REAL started. Matt had his own school. He was a sort of like contracted out. He would teach for a bunch of different places. Trip had his own school, which was with F1, which was a brand that he was repping at the time. Again, before they were even making inflatable kites, they were all foil kites back then, which is pretty crazy. So back in the 1900s, they didn't have inflatable kites at F1. And I was teaching, and a few other of us, but we were like, we didn't have enough business to really like support each other, right? We were all competitors, but yet we were all friends. And then they had this amazing vision for REAL Watersports and asked me to be involved at the beginning. And one of the things was we set out to truly grow the sport. So it wasn't just like, oh, this is a great way to make some money, even though it was like, a job. There was this like greater purpose. We knew that if we created more kiteboarders, they would bring their friends.
Yeah, let's double click that one. What was it? I know I know what you speak of. Like when you first learn how to kiteboard, it's like, well, I need as many people. It's like the answer to world peace, to enlightenment. Like I know that. What was it that was compelling and motivating all you guys?
It's really, I feel like it's difficult still for me to put it into words, because I still experience this when new people learn to kiteboard, or now wing foil or foil, right? There's something about this, I don't know, like there's something entrancing about the sensation of harnessing the wind and using it to propel you across the water. I was never a windsurfer, not because I didn't think it was a beautiful sport. I just was never really exposed to it.
Right.
When I it seemed too daunting and too expensive. The amount of gear you needed, all these things, right? But like skiing, snowboarding, bike riding, skateboarding, I don't know, these sports, like you can touch, feel, see this thing that you're using, right? Like you're riding on the dirt, you're riding on the snow, you can feel the snow that's falling. Wind sports, like wind is this thing, right? You can't grab it, you can't hold it, you can't touch it, there's no real metric. Like when you look at the snow, you're like, there's 2 feet of snow there, I'm gonna go shred pow, right? But when you get out, that sensation of like feeling the wind on your face, putting your hands in the air, all the weird little ritualistic things we do to like figure out what kite to go on, wing to go on, right?
Right.
You're taking some element that isn't really like, you can't put in a box, you can't hold it, yet you can harness it and use it to propel you. And that is beyond magical. You get that same sensation in sailing, you get that same sensation, I know, in, windsurfing and foiling and kiting, but it's freaking magical.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It is. Oh. And it's really not, you can try to describe it to somebody and people glaze over and they're like, huh?
Yeah.
But then when you feel it, even for that, again, back to that moment of launching the kite and flying in the air for the first time, like I hit the ground in a way that maybe would have turned people away. But I was like, I want that again. Not the hitting the ground part. I want that feeling of like, this is this breeze that blows the flags and the trees and whatever. And I just now launched in the air and it pulled me like a, 195-pound human. And I was like, I want more of this.
Yeah.
Right. And you're right. When somebody feels that, when you teach that to somebody or you share that with somebody, you just see it. They're calling people. They get to the beach and they're, oh, you got to come try this. They want to bring their brother and their neighbor and their friend and their wife and their girlfriend, whatever. Like they want that shared experience and sensation.
It changes everything. You bring up a point that I definitely don't want to go off on a sidebar, but how many men have like tried to teach their significant other how to kiteboard out of pure love and passion, and you have to, and it ends disastrously always.
I also think one of my favorite things about the early days of teaching kiteboarding, and even still to today, even though the gear's a lot easier, is it's a finesse-based sport.
Absolutely.
And men will typically try to power through it and women will finesse it. And I can remember like early days of like real macho guy and his girl come and learn, and the guy's like yelling at the kite and he's freaking out and he's trying to overpower it and he's not getting it. And then his like, kind of more timid, lighter weight girlfriend is like, hey honey. And she's just kind of cruising along because there's this finesse that's required, which I also think is a beautiful part of it, because you can't just overpower the wind.
I think that's why we were so successful early on with Beneath the Surface Foundation. We would have these very hardened special operations combat veterans. They were all men at the time, going through these immersions. And it's like they look at this rolled up, piece of nylon. They're like, how is that supposed to elicit any type of sensation out of me? It's like, well, hold on a minute. Let's put this 9-meter up in 25 knots of wind, and it's a whole new experience and instantaneous. The level of presence and focus and attention, and we saw that so much too. The trying to muscle it until there was that internal shift, and that's when the magic happens.
Well, it becomes like a dance, or it becomes a partnership. Right? Like you have to become friends with your kite or your wing. You have to work together. There's this, you're controlling it, but if you try to overpower it, it's going to overpower you. There's this thing where, and I think for say somebody with the Beneath Surface Foundation, for a veteran who's maybe used to being this dominating control force within their own life, whatever that means, now all of a sudden they're given this, it's a tool, but it's a tool, but it's a toy, right? It's this cross, like it's a toy, but yet it's a tool for this sport that we want to do, but it's well beyond the sport. Like it's a tool for learning about yourself, right? It's a tool for the moment you're, whatever your comfort level is, which for some people is 10 yards off the shore or 10 meters off the shore, 20 meters, 100 meters, like you are you and this tool. And if you don't work with it, it's just going to drag you away from shore.
Absolutely.
But if you work with it and you work in this wonderful dance and you start to have this relationship, it can bring you back to shore.
We would give lessons on responsibility. It's like learning how to responsibly manage what you have. And we would apply a lot of like emotional philosophy to what we were teaching. And that was one of the early lessons of like, hey, yeah, you're attached to this massive piece of fabric that's 20 meters away from you, and your actions will influence what happens. So we taught a lot about like responsibility of like how much emotional space, how much energetic space. It was really powerful work that we did. And I'm really proud of that. I want to go back. You at one point wanted to be a teacher at a young age. Yeah.
I did. I grew up, both my mother and stepfather are now retired teachers, but they were educators, and I always really respected both of them in that realm. My mom was absolutely destined, and that was her calling, was teaching, and helping sort of mold the youth. And, it gave her this purpose, and I grew up seeing that, and I knew it wasn't like a lucrative financial type of position, but yet it afforded her the ability for us to have this time together in the summer, because they had the time off, which was great, in a family setting growing up. But I also saw like what she got out of helping these children, and then also then, you know, when she'd run into them later in life, just all these things. My aunt was also a teacher in my school district, so I sort of saw her family member working within, you know, my elementary school. So it was like what I was exposed to, and I just thought it was incredibly rewarding to be able to, you know, help the youth or help share that. And then as I got older and I started becoming more aware of like sort of the administrative side of schools, and I think that was at a time when teachers' roles were changing, you know, where it was less about teaching and more about
standardized testing,
standardized testing and metrics and hitting these numbers and pushing kids through almost, you know, like unfortunately I feel like that's what our educational system in a broad setting in the United States has kind of come to,
for sure,
is a little bit about these numbers, and it's less about helping to really truly like mold the youth as it is like pushing them through and checking a box, right? And that's not to say all are like that, but that's what I started seeing. And then when I got to college and I started teaching skiing and snowboarding to both children and adults, they would come and pay for the lesson. They would want to be there. You were still able to share this thing with them, and then the joy that they would experience when they would get it, and whatever that was, the little snowplow for the little kid that goes 10 feet to like, you know, the teenager learning to do a 360 off a jump, whatever it was, when they achieved that and you could see it in their face and they would high five or hug you or thank you endlessly, like, oh, wait, people want to do these things, and I can get something out of it, and I'm becoming better at this sport, and I'm providing this service that I feel is like valuable.
What was it more for you? And I mean, it could be a balance of both. Was it your own progression, being like, was the fact that you were progressing as an athlete through teaching what was motivating you, or was it the, you know, the purposeful interactions you were having with people that was drawing you to, you know, to teach and share these sports?
You know, I think at the time, it was, I would have said it was about my progression.
Okay.
But they were happening simultaneously. And I think I realized looking back now, it was a lot more about that interaction and sharing and connection.
Right.
Like meaningful connection.
Absolutely.
Because you were potentially altering someone's life. You know, you're
inviting them into a tribe
right.
that we were all part of.
Giving them, it's almost like you're giving them a gift. Like, yes, they're paying for your service, but you, especially the more you put into it, you know, you had people that didn't really put that much into it, just like any kind of service industry. And you're like, leave, and you're a little just like whatever. But the more I put into it, the more they got out of it, the happier they were. You know, that might result in a better tip, like all these things that at the time I was like, oh, that's what I did it for.
Right.
But it was really way more than that, right? It was this sharing or gifting a life-changing experience. Maybe they never come back to it, but they can still take that in other places in their life, or maybe it changes their life, which I still see. You know, I started kiting in 99 and started teaching almost immediately. So let's say 2000, by the summer of 2000, I was teaching full time. I still run into students that I had back then that are coming here and kiting. You know, you might not remember me, and some of them I remember, some of them I don't. But like, it changed their lives, and they're not, now their families do it, their kids do it, their vacations are based around it. Maybe they bought a home and a place to do, like it shifted their life the same way it shifted mine, the same way I know it shifted yours. Like that's powerful, and not something you get to do all the time.
Ever. I was in South Africa last winter, actually this time last year, and I was having dinner over at a friend's house, and a kid came up who I hadn't met before. Mark Madama learned how to kite. You gave him his
Mark
first kite.
Yeah. I taught his dad.
That's exactly. Yeah.
Like his dad and one of his dad's friends were like one of my early guinea pig lessons. And then we would go stay in when we would travel for contests in Jersey, his parents would house us, and it was he and his sister were these little kids, you know, like, and now, I mean, he's one of the most outstanding athletes, you know, and he's taken it into a bunch of different directions. But he's an incredible athlete. But yeah, Mark Miedema was one of those early ones. Like, yeah, it's absolutely, you know, fascinating how many people sort of have come through that Real Watersports program.
Yeah,
I mean,
talk to
you're
me
right,
about that.
thousands.
So you guys decide at the dawn of the Y2K era, the world actually didn't collapse, which we all thought it was going to. We survived Y2K. I mean,
At the end of the 1900s.
At the end of the 1900s, we made it through Y2K. I mean, that's a pretty big flex. So you guys decide that Real Watersports is going to be this epicenter for teaching kiteboarding because you're passionate about it. You feel what it's done to your lives and your communities, and talk us through the early days of Real and what it was like teaching at the dawn of when kiteboarding was very dangerous.
Yeah, the Matt and Trip. So Matt Nuzzo and Trip Foreman, who have mentioned, the owners of Real, had this vision from day one. I can remember them inviting me to a lunch with this little kind of hand-drawn map of this facility they wanted to make, and they wanted to base it off like high-end heli skiing style, where there was lodging, a restaurant, maybe some nightlife, the ability to buy your gear that you needed and outfit yourself in what was necessary for the sport, the sport of kiteboarding. Or now they're become a major surfboard dealer. So like this sort of like Outer Banks experience. And at the time we had nothing like that, and nothing like that existed in kiteboarding for sure. And, I was still pretty young and focused on maybe my progression. And I was like, okay, like I had a small kiteboarding school at another shop, but I was really torn. I wanted to compete more and travel more and wasn't putting as much in. And then they wanted to do this like sort of grand thing. And I was like, you know what? Like I'm 100% in. So we did set out to, our tagline was we make new riders every day. And it was to grow the sport so that we would have return clients for higher end lessons. They would bring their friends. We'd be able to provide them with gear, but more than anything, we could grow this sport that we all love so much, so that we all had jobs for one, but to become a destination hub, because Hatteras was such a good place to learn. Shallow, flat water, not a lot of boat traffic, sandy bottoms, so no rocks, no reef. You have some broken shells or, debris on the bottom, so you still wear booties, but like not gnarly reefs to get drug over, and not
trying to launch at Hokipa.
Yeah, and not like barges like you have in the river here, and like no shoreline to come to if you go somewhere where you don't want to be. There it was like pretty low risk, right? You go downwind, pack your stuff up, hitchhike back or walk back on the sand, and you're all good. Maybe some mosquito bites and a jellyfish sting or two, but that's about it, right? But yeah, we just really wanted to create this atmosphere that really was fostering learning and shared knowledge, and just being able to, again, gift this experience that was so meaningful to all of us. And I don't even know that it wasn't like we sat around being like, man, this sport's wonderful, but we would have these sessions and you would end your day and you're like, every day was like the greatest thing ever, because you are riding this sort of archaic gear at this point. Like if you went out on a session and we did an ocean downwinder, I'd say on the early days, maybe 20 to 30% of the people made it. Right? Like, and not like they never came back, but
right,
like,
of course,
your valve would open up in the middle of your half mile offshore, and you'd look up and your kite would just go and fall down, right? And then to be like, okay, rescue mission. Somebody grab the kite, somebody grab the person, drag them in, or lines would just break. Bars would break in half. You'd jump, you'd hit a wave going out, jump, and your bar would break in half in the air, and you'd be holding two pieces with your chicken loop attached, the first days of inflatable kites, and you're like, well, this is going to go poorly, right? If you happen to have two hands on the bar. If you had one hand off the bar, now you're
death looping.
Now you're just death looping. Yeah. And so, it was this thing of like, when we all made it to the end, you shared in this, like, we did this, and as that got better, the gear progressed so rapidly that like we were getting better because the gear was getting better. The lessons were getting better because they were getting safer. So yeah, there were early days of coaching where, I can remember giving people lessons and then selling them gear, and then quietly, like, whatever your communication with a higher power is, I'm like, please let this person come back, because like you would sort of send them out being like, I hope they can do this.
Yeah,
Because at the time it was kind of questionable.
for sure.
Um,
Was there the IKO? Did that exist at the time?
it did not.
So when you guys were teaching and coaching and bringing new kiteboarders to life, like, did you have an existing syllabus? Were you inventing it on the fly? Were you just kind of sharing notes? Like, how did you teach such a dangerous sport to ordinary people?
So there was no PASA, there was no IKO. I mean, I think PASA existed because it's the Professional Air Sports Association, but
Okay.
it was hang gliders and other things, right? But in kiteboarding, we didn't. I personally, like I mentioned, I was a ski and snowboard coach, and I had gotten my PSIA and AASI certification in the winter of 98 or 99. Doesn't really matter. But when I went back to apply for a coaching position, essentially to start a school with a shop in Cape Hatteras, I took my workbook from my AASI snowboard course, and I wrote a lesson plan for kiteboarding from setup and flying of a trainer kite all the way to wave riding and jumping. And at that point, I had a, start to finish comprehensive sort of syllabus or curriculum.
Wow.
However, I could go in one direction. I could ride right foot forward for about 100 yards at a time before crashing.
Wow.
So I did not know how to kiteboard, but I knew how to teach, and I knew what you would have to learn along the way to get to that point. And I went to this shop in school, and I just was super open with them. I was like, they had a full wall at that time of Nash kites, floor to ceiling. Not one person in the building knew how to set them up, how to use them, how to fly them, and they were selling them, which to me seemed very questionable.
Irresponsible.
Yeah, but they weren't selling many,
Okay.
and they weren't trying to sell many because they were like, we don't really even know how to tell somebody to set this up. So as I showed up, I was this much better than anybody there because I knew how to use them. I knew how to go in one direction, and I agreed to only teach below my ability level. Like if somebody had already gone to Maui and taken a lesson and showed up and was like, I want to learn how to jump, we wouldn't take their business because nobody knew how to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went in with a full program. I actually found it recently. I found my notes, like my notebook that I saved from writing that like first handwritten
Wow.
lesson plan. And I, typed it out, printed it out, showered, shaved, put on a nice shirt, showed up and pitched my lesson program to this school. And they kind of thought about it and sent me away. And about an hour later called and said, if you want the job, you have the job. And we have two windsurfing team riders. It was a husband and wife that were windsurfers, competitive, and they're team riders. And they want to learn how to kite. Come back up and teach them how to kite. So I went from creating this plan to then putting it into action. And I immediately lost my first student because I put him on a kite size that I would ride. Because I was like, we're about the same size. I should be on a 7. He should be on a 7. Where, I know now, and I knew quickly that maybe a 4 or 5, or, you start small. And I also didn't really take into consideration how fast he would go away. And so I just remember running down the shoreline and trying to run through the shallows to get this person, and then, apologize for sending them off by themselves and walk back and be like, okay, what's next? And then it was like, they were also a jet ski rental place. So I was like, okay, we're going to use jet skis.
Okay.
So it was we were figuring it out on the fly.
Yeah.
Matt Nuzzo and Trip Foreman were already doing the same thing. And then because we were all friends, even though we were competitors, we would really compare notes, hanging out at the beach, what worked, what didn't work. And then with Real, when we all sort of almost like Voltron, like if you date myself, but we all just formed to this one big unit. And then it was, okay, how do we create a lesson program? How do we create, what has gone down as probably the most successful program, which was a 0 to hero kite camp, like taking somebody from not knowing anything to successfully kiteboarding in 3 days. And yeah, we just wrote out our own lesson program. So in honest, when IKO and Paso did first come into fruition, or first come into the scene, our stuff was way more advanced because we'd already been doing it for
Been
a couple of
validated
years.
and taught.
And that's not saying better. It was
Right.
just our experiential coaching moments at that time were pretty thick. Like we had 5 or 6 or 7 guys and girls that had already been working independently, now coming together to join forces, and this works and this doesn't. And so we just sort of developed our own program that was outside of the realm of those organizations at that time.
Who were some of the early clients for the Zero to Hero program? Like what type of people, or like what demographic? Were they windsurfers previously, intrigued by it?
Those initial early on people, I mean, I feel like, yeah, the initial clients and customers that we had, or people drawn to it, I feel like were a little bit of everything. You had windsurfer crossovers for sure. That was sort of the, I know I want to do this destination type people. But I feel like kite surfing and kiteboarding, which those terms I feel like are, interchangeable, obviously, in this situation. It was fascinating, the people that would be drawn in, like, the off the couch or off the beach. A lot of times in Cape Hatteras, it was beachgoers. Matt Nuzzo had this amazing idea early on. We got waterproof plastic business cards made, and we put them in our board shorts, and we would just do downwinders in the ocean.
And just hand them out?
Yeah, laughing, jumping, smash, and then you'd come into the beach, and people would like swarm you, what is that? What are you doing? And you'd be like, here you go. Here's my plastic business card. And it was amazing.
That's
like
genius.
just, yeah, busy summer beach day, and the amount of people that had never done a water sport, wind sport, and were just like, I need to do that, and again, this magnetic pull that people couldn't even describe. Like they'd come into the shop, a little shop at the time, and just be like, well, sign me up. Where do I take lessons? Here's my credit card. Like, I just need to do this thing I saw these guys doing on the beach. And we're like, oh, that was all us, and they being Matt and Trip were fantastic in their branding, bright red shirts, a really recognizable logo, the plastic business cards, all of us doing these group downwinders, which were so fun, and so like we were just kids. Like we were like these little kids having a blast, spraying each other down and jumping over each other. And, it just like, it was infectious.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was everything from your windsurfer, and some surfers. I think there was way more resistance to kite surfing and kiteboarding early on from surfing. Especially in Cape Hatteras at the time, it was pretty, surfers at the time. I don't think there was as much of there was not as much of this well-rounded waterman kind of Kai Lenny era that we're in now, where you can surf and stand up and wing and foil and kite and tow and paddle, and like that's this desire for this generation, which is beautiful.
It's wonderful. But yeah, back in those days, very inclusive.
Yeah, like, and the tribe was wonderful in surfing, but it was you had to earn your stripes, right? You had to earn your way in. You had to sit outside the lineup before you could be inside. Even after you got a bunch of good waves, you maybe still weren't like part of that cool crowd, right? Whereas kite surfing was the opposite.
Yeah.
From day one, you were just in the tribe, right? You were part of this new thing, and it was just so inclusive to age. Like didn't matter how old you were, how young you were, if you were a man, a woman, what your background was. Like it was just, you were brought into this thing like from day one, from that moment that you learned how to body drag, right? You got propelled by this thing 20 yards, you were in.
You're in.
Right?
Yeah.
And and we had this one client that I can always remember, who came for months, if not years. It's a little fuzzy now. I don't know that he ever really became a kiteboarder. He was overweight, non-athletic, but he loved it. And he would come and take lessons religiously. And he would keep trying. And eventually he could sort of go back and forth, but he was not, a self-admitted not athletic person, but he loved it. And he loved the community and being part of the scene. And I just always like think back to him, because I was just always amazed. His sort of tenacity and his determination. But part of it, I think, was that community, and that everybody made him feel welcome. Even though, like if he would have showed up at a beach and that with his surfboard under his arm, he would have been labeled a kook and told to go home. Beat it, kook, you know, get out of my way.
Right.
Where all of a sudden we were like, no, come with us. And so there was something really appealing about that too. That was like, and it's still to this day, I think kiteboarding and the sports that have spawned off of that, you know, kiteboarding, windsurfing, and wing foiling now and all this stuff is one of the most welcoming communities of sport that I've ever been involved with.
Oh, I agree completely. You bring up such a good point regarding the guy who kept coming. That's such a massive part of my own deliverable as a performance coach. Like I work a lot with athletes who are already in that space. And I also work with people who haven't necessarily like penetrated. They don't have a lifestyle that is built around an action and adventure sport. And that's why I encourage it so aggressively, because it does have that effect on people. Like the guy which you mentioned, maybe he's overweight, he's not athletic based off of his prior experience, but because he's so drawn to kiteboarding, he wants to learn, he wants to be in this tribe, he wants to experience doing the downwinders and hooting and hollering that you guys are all demonstrating. I feel like when you have that catalyst and you have that higher goal, it gives more texture to everything that you're doing. Maybe he wakes up and he's like, well, I know I should go to the gym, but I don't know. I don't want to just go to the gym and go through it, you know, these repetitive motions. But now he has an end goal. Well, I want to be strong enough so that I can swim in when my kite gear fails, or I want to be able to paddle out, you know, on a decent sized surf day. When people have this attachment or this North Star that is their primary action adventure sport, I truly believe, and this is my whole thesis of this brand, is like that is what gives life more meaning. And
100%.
Yeah, and I stand by that completely.
It's 100%.
I definitely I wanted to, you brought up the interesting point. I definitely want to just take a little sidebar where the difference in surf culture and we'll call it kite culture. Obviously now we have wing foiling, and I see a lot of spillover from that. I grew up surfing. I grew up windsurfing. I was mentored by a lineup, which I think has a very unique set of like social behaviors and expectations that, for right or wrong, we're kind of taught at a young age. And I personally, and I'm not saying this with any disrespect, it's just an observation, but you can tell kiters perhaps that didn't grow up with any type of surf culture influence. You know, I think they have less awareness of the surrounding area. You know, we see it every summer. You know, here in Hood River on the sandbar, you see kite TV with people who definitely lack the air awareness or the responsibility of their kite lines, and it's just something that I find interesting. It's like, well, I think if this person had a surfing background, they may understand the rotation. They might have a little bit more awareness. So this is all to say that while the surf culture can be a little exclusive and a little abrasive, I do still have a very soft spot in my heart.
No,
and I know you do too.
Yeah, you brought up being sort of mentored by the lineup, right? Like, I think that's also the difference between the two, say categories of sport of surfing and that kite surf culture and kite culture. I wouldn't trade either one, meaning like I think I've gleaned a bunch of information and really key points from both, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I remember trying to get surf lessons as a kid. Like, my mom saw that I was loving bodyboarding and wanted to surf, so we kind of signed up for a lesson, right? And as a 16-year-old kid, I would have to like go to the top of the stairs and wake up my drunk surf coach from the night before, and he'd like roll out of bed, oh yeah, paddle out, and whatever. Like, it was like a not very structured
For sure.
lesson, right? Maybe in hindsight, wrong coach, wrong location, whatever. Doesn't really matter. And then I can remember getting to college and okay, I could maybe get to my feet, and my buddies were like, oh yeah, there's a swell hitting New Jersey, like let's go to Long Beach Island, we'll teach you how to surf.
LBI.
Yeah, LBI. We'll teach you how to surf. sweet. I'm like, in my mind, we're driving there. I'm like, oh, I got these guys. They're good surfers. They're going to teach me how to surf. And like, the lesson was, this is the board you're going to take. Not even should. This is what we have for you to use. Way too small, way too short. And just paddle out. And when you get out there, catch a wave. And then they just paddled out, right? And this was like pounding Jersey, hollow, shore break. I don't think I ever made it out on that trip. Like I don't remember, but I don't think I made it out. And it was this clear moment of like, okay, I'm good. This is something I have to learn on my own, right? I'm going to take something from these people. Like you said, you're mentored by the lineup. And that means I'm watching how this works. Okay, I get to this point. I sit here. Maybe I wait my turn, but there was no like, hey kid, come here. Like,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like the learning or the teaching was a bit of like, go do this.
Yeah.
You're like, okay. And then with kiting, at least this is obviously my take on it. I believe that in kiteboarding and in kite culture, the simple act of asking somebody for a launch or landing breaks the ice of having to ask somebody else for help. And that's not saying you can't obviously self-launch and self-land, but back in the day, you really couldn't that well.
Yeah.
Right? Like self-launching and self-landing was like this Russian roulette roll of the dice of, am I going to destroy my kite? Am I going to destroy myself? Am I going to destroy somebody else downwind of me?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and so it wasn't this like nice bridled thing we have now that they're pretty depowerable and controllable. So it was a humbling experience. Like if you went to a new spot, the first thing you did was, hey man, can you help me launch? And that breaks the ice of now I had to ask another human being for help. And then that person might offer me tidbits of knowledge of like, I definitely help you out, but like, hey, there's some rocks under the water over there. There's a jetty. Don't go downwind of this. You get wind shadowed. Like, oh, actually, you're just learning. It's not that great for you here. Let me help you walk up the beach so you can come down. Like there's this human communication and connection that we get just simply by being like, hey, bro, can you give me a launch?
Yeah.
That surfing is almost the
opposite.
Polar opposite.
Yeah.
That is, I paddle and I sit this far from you and we never look at each other.
Yeah.
We maybe never say a word. If I look at you, I might get yelled at.
Yeah.
I might get punched. I might get if I say the wrong thing, I might not actually get a wave today, right? So like
I even made it out because I tried to paddle out through the shore break. And,
right. And I actually got in someone's way and they told me to go back in and I'm like, oh, so it's a huge difference, right? From being in what I call surfing is sometimes the most antisocial social sport ever.
Truly.
And you can paddle out in a lineup and have it be super welcoming and friendly, but I've also paddled out in a lineup where you're like, ooh, no one's talking today. I'm not going to break the silence or whatever, or like that guy just got physically removed from the water by that big dude. I don't want to be next. Head down, do my own things. So that difference of sort of being forced to interact with another human, having that human help you, then wanting to help the next person because they just helped you. Like it's this snowball effect of kindness almost, like in a real small way. And it's just enough of a shift that I think it then welcomes like, oh man, I helped you launch earlier. Like, why don't you come grab a beer with us? Or like, we're all going to get a meal, or hey, we're having this in Hatteras. It'd be like, hey, we're having this bonfire on the beach. Like, bring your friends, show up. And now all of a sudden, this little tribe, like you are really part of it, right? You're not this outsider. You're in the crew, and that I think neurologically even is a major shift.
That's huge. As human beings, when you look at so we talk about curiosity, passion, and purpose, one feeding into the other. Curiosities make intersection, they create passions. When we have these passions, they provide so much texture for our life. But purpose is when we apply our passions externally, when we give them back to the tribe. That's all hardwired in our DNA and survivability. Like we, as human beings, neurobiologically, neurochemically, we need to be a part of a tribe. It's our survivability. It's our sense of belonging. It's how we find fulfillment and joy out of living. And you bring up such a great point with kiteboarding, having this communal, welcoming, bringing people in. So now you're getting the thrill of participating in the sport, of finding harmony with nature, of being able to harness and balance these incredible forces, and you're getting this sense of community, this sense of belonging to a global tribe. You combine all those things, that's like one of the most potent uh, experiences that a human can have. And I think that's why so many people structure and build their lives around kiteboarding. Like, you see it constantly. It's like, thankfully, there's a lot of different paths and disciplines where people can have a professional career like yourself, like so many of our friends who have built their life around kiteboarding. But I think an ordinary person can do the same thing. Like you mentioned, the early days at Real, where you teach fathers and sons, and they just keep coming back and buying houses in Hatteras and, spending summers in Hood River and winters in Maui. And it's like, it just becomes this global tribe that once you're in, like you're never leaving because you don't want to.
I feel like, you bring up that sort of the neurological side, or that sense of community that we as humans, fundamentally have always wanted or needed, right? It's just been like part of our DNA to some extent. And it's really fascinating that, like, whether it was the tribe of, somebody kills the buffalo and brings the meat back and shares it. Somebody else grows the vegetables and brings, it's like the, sport version of that. It's your, helping somebody slightly tweak their gear, especially in the early days of like stuff out of the bag wasn't quite set up, right? So somebody might get a kite that truly was flying horribly and was hurting their progress. And as a, coach and or professional athlete, I could, not just me, but our crew could show up at the beach and be like, hey bro, let me make this adjustment and whatever. And now they have a greater success, right? And they're just like, you impart that knowledge on them and they're like, oh my God, you just blew my mind. Like, now I'm having more fun. And then again, that feedback comes back to you. So it is that sort of give and take that we just search for, and sort of validation and purpose and, bonding experience that we all sort of search for.
Absolutely.
And I also think the fact that the resource is somewhat infinite, and that's not to say like your top flat water spots or your top waves, like people are going for like a finite area, but for the most part, there's enough room for everybody.
Yeah, truly.
Surfing, there's so many waves, little takeoff spot, again, this is generalization of like a break, and you may or may not get your turn, right? Or you may or may not get your wave that you want because somebody else is in priority or there. But kiteboarding, we can all go out.
Yeah.
10 of us, 20 of us, 100 of us. Like, yeah, it gets more crowded and people can say like, oh, it's really crowded today, but you're really not in each other's way. And you're not like taking the wind. You're not like, you didn't just like,
that guy's got all the wind.
Yeah, he's got all the wind or she's got all the wind. Like, that doesn't exist versus like, you're like, that guy's a wave hog, right? Yeah. Or whatever that is. So I think that also is really nice. Like, there's only so much powder before the powder goes away, right? Yeah. There's only so many waves in this swell before the swell dies or the tide gets wrong. But if the wind's blowing, we can all go and have a good time. And I think that also like lessens the stress level of like the human nature of like, I need to get mine.
Truly.
Right?
Yeah.
You're like, we can get ours.
We can get ours.
And like that, it really takes the like I, me, and my part of the sport, and it becomes this we, us, and our scenario, and I think that's like pretty meaningful of a shift in like the way that we just sort of see what we're doing and have that willingness to want to help others.
Yeah. I used to, when I would, in the early day, well, I got not the early days, the like late 2008, 2009, 2010, I was doing a lot of back-to-back deployments to Afghanistan at the time. And this is when the Taliban had not yet come back in power, and the Afghani kids were all allowed to fly kites. And that was such a huge part of their culture. Like, if you've ever read The Kite Runner, you know all about that. It's, they compete and they fly these kites, and I would be in the helicopter and be scanning, looking out, and I would just see so many kites on the horizon, and we'd fly over these little villages, and these kids would just be, I could literally see the smiles on their face from 200, 300 feet up in a helicopter. And I had this idea that I wanted to go and do a kiteboarding mission to Afghanistan, because I had this in my brain, the part of Afghanistan in like Helmand, it's really desert, it's dry, it's all different shades of brown. And I had this idea of a kite documentary where just these beautiful, bright neon colors and these massive kites would just rise up from the barren earth, and like just the slow motion riding in a canal with a big spray and all these Afghani kids just jumping up and down. And I was like, that would literally be the answer to, naively, I would think this, right? Like, well,
Right.
this is the answer. Like, nobody's going to be fighting and causing conflict if everybody's, has this experience to go out and kiteboarding. And I remember I would visualize and fantasize about that shot almost every day. When it was windy, we'd fly over and I would just see it. And it's exactly what you're describing, this inclusivity that kiteboarding does, that these sports teach. And I felt so passionately and so strongly about it that I was like, this could literally be the answer to world peace. Like if Kim Jong-un or, like if this guy just like went out and took a kiteboarding trip, like, dude, like I think you're going to mellow out a little bit. And that was powerful for me at a time to have something where I could find this idea of beauty that surrounded kiteboarding in the most, at the time, was, the most darkest of places, the most violent of times. I knew that it was something so special, and that I would spend the rest of my life structuring and around it how to be deeper into this tribe and into this community.
You bring up a really amazing point there. Like, those kids that you were witnessing and you were observing every day were in a pretty gnarly situation, right? Like, obviously not optimal living situation at that time, and the conflict and whatever, but they could still find joy in flying kites.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like a lot of times slightly overlooked in the sort of discussion of kiteboarding is, yes, it's an action sport, it's an extreme sport, it's rad. I mean, and in whatever level that is for you, if that's going back and forth and that's your version of like intense, or if that's, Jesse Richmond, who was a guest on your show and who's riding Jaws and winning the King of the Air, right? Like, those people are experiencing their version of sort of that max joy and experience, right?
Absolutely.
Fundamentally, we're still just flying kites. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as a kid, like I talked about the trainer kites I would fly. Prior to that, as like a little kid, I can remember holding a kite and that interesting joy of letting the string out, of like, I can remember specifically, maybe it's a story, but I had a Star Wars speeder bike kite, and it had a long tail, and it was the shape of a Star Wars, speeder bike, little fly through the jungle thing. And I can remember putting it out, and I always wanted to see how far it could go. And it's this little thing in the air, and then the string let go, and it ran out of string, and the thing flew away. And I can remember being so disappointed as a child, but like that desire to just, how far can it go? How far can I push this? Where is it going to go? But like, and all that is holding this string, right? But there's a simplicity of that for children that's really enjoyable. And then, as a human, you need to make it more complex, right? So then we get two handles, and now we can steer this thing. And then there's maybe controllable front and back. And now all of a sudden we're gifted this sport that allows us to fly a kite just like we were a little child again every day. Yeah. So, a lot of times it's like talked about the craft that you're riding, the wave that you're riding, that, the King of the Air finals were this morning. We were having a discussion about this intense, insane event that goes on in South Africa, which is pushing the utmost limits of people's body and the sport. But they're also still just flying kites. They're kids flying kites,
Truly.
And like that in itself, I think, is this weird component that doesn't get talked about a lot, of like that childlike, innocent simplicity of joy of putting a kite up in the wind, and we get to do it every day.
Yeah.
And it becomes something you don't think about. And it becomes something that
we take it for granted.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
But like, I still smile when I look at my kite in the air at times, you know what I mean? And I don't even know why, but I know that that's what it's coming back to, is like being the little kid on the beach and being like, this is freaking cool.
Yeah.
And now I'm attached to it, and now I'm jumping in the air, I'm riding this wave, or I'm exploring off the coast of some island somewhere, and like maybe even in conditions that you would never want to be in the water in otherwise. I think that's like a fascinating thing. Like when it's 45 knots on the river here, I wouldn't want to be swimming. I
Right.
wouldn't want to be in a kayak. I wouldn't want to be in an inner tube, but like I want to be on a kite. You know, when it's maxing out at jaws, like those guys that are kiting, they're in conditions that most normal humans wouldn't want to be in. Like
Truly.
off the coast of North Carolina, when it's pre or post hurricane and the ocean is just angry. But when you're attached to that kite, like you can be 20 feet away from the exploding quadruple overhead death barrel
Yeah.
with your eyes open and your smile wide and being like, I am so glad I'm on this kite because I wouldn't want to be here in any other scenario.
Yeah.
And that to me has always been this crazy draw that I think appeals to a lot of people, because if they're not like an action sports like junkie, like we've both discussed that we've been, maybe not junkie, but something that you've always had in your life, they experience this through kiteboarding and they're just like, it's basically like opening up a door to a whole new world.
Absolutely. I love how you describe the simplicity of flying a kite, and it just brought up a memory that is so like fundamental for most of my adult life. When I first started returning from a lot of these really heavy deployments, I would go and seek some sort of healing through the ocean. You know, we talked about the ocean's energy previously, like being drawn to it, and there was something so nurturing and like almost maternal for that. I found a lot of healing through and post-traumatic growth through kiteboarding, which is ultimately, you know, the catalyst for the work we did at Beneath the Surface Foundation. But I hate to keep plugging it. But what was always so, it was a switch for me where I would be on the beach and I would walk my lines out and I had my whole ritual, and the turning point from this crazy chaotic thoughts of you know, fear and repetitive anxious loops that you experience with PTS, to now my kite's on its edge, and you know, I give my thumbs up, and now the kite just starts to come to life, and then everything would, it would just go silent. And I would just bring the kite up, and now I'm harnessing, I'm holding in my hand all the wind, and I'm about to go and you know, and dance with the water. And that, the simplicity of it, you distilled it so perfectly. You're just flying a kite. That's all we're doing. We're flying a kite. But how powerful that simple act can be and has been for us, and you know, for countless others, it's remarkable. Which brings me to a question. You have taught thousands of people to kiteboard. Can anyone learn how to kite?
Yes. Well, yes.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think
Because I get this a lot. I get a lot of pushback. So I've worked a lot in, you know, in the Silicon Valley space. You and I have both worked in the three comma clubs a lot, and we experience a lot of people who maybe don't have never had to work for something so aggressively before, and well, I could never, and they have this like, you know, this fixed mindset, which I disagree with completely. I truly believe, but I'm not an experienced kiteboarding coach like you are. So I really want to get your thoughts. Like, can anybody with the right mindset learn to kite?
I mean, I think, you know, on a fundamental level, anybody can learn anything, right? Like, and I don't mean that as a smart ass or anything. I think, you know, your mindset and what you choose to allow yourself to do, the potential's there for anybody to do anything, right? Part of it is mindset. Part of it is limiting beliefs. You know, like the limiting beliefs that we have, everybody has them in whatever that form is. If you let them take over and tell you can't do it, you can't do it, because you're not allowing yourself to actually like open the door to accepting that you can be a beginner and you can learn in incremental small steps and you can get better every day, whatever that means, right? So fundamentally, I would say yes, anybody can learn how to kiteboard. You know, I've had some interesting, I have a few different friends with paralyzed or amputated arms that have tried to teach the kiteboard. Great people, great athletes, great humans. We've run into some struggles of what that means for them to learn how to kiteboard, right? The simplicity of flying your kite and holding onto your board. Now all of a sudden that doesn't exist if you only have one arm, right? Like
Right,
the, and right. So like I think that there are some limitations within somebody's physical
Right.
makeup.
Right. Of course.
Right.
There's a lot of work being done. You know, we're both friends with Brett Sheeran, who does a lot of work
100%.
with Adaptive Maui, organizations who are trying to bring these adaptive variations of these extreme sports.
And that's a great point. I think that there's going to be, like my friend who he's done fairly well and he's learned how to kite. It's been he learned on the snow because the snow is an easier modality. He's a skier. So independent foot action, land, not water, the ability to walk back if something went wrong,
Right.
So he did learn on skis. He's transitioned it to water. It's just been a slow process, but when he mountain bikes, he has a prosthetic for a mountain bike arm. He has sort of a ski arm. He does the Molokai. He's an insane athlete. He's another Patagonia ambassador, but he does like the Molokai paddle race and has a paddle arm. He surfs, right? So I think that somebody like that could get a prosthetic for kiting, whatever that looks like.
I did Molokai as a fully functioning human and I almost died.
Yeah, on his particular one, his arm came unglued, so he actually finished it with one arm.
What a savage!
Freaking crazy, yeah. Wow. With his other prosthetic like between his legs on his paddleboard. So insane, dude.
Legend.
Yeah.
What's his name?
His name is Jeff Denholm.
Okay.
He's an absolute legend. Wonderful human being.
You mentioned something earlier about limiting beliefs, and my personal experience with the work that I do as a performance coach, and I'm curious if you have a similar experience. I find that most adults, their limiting belief is they can't be a beginner.
Yeah.
It's very challenging to learn something as an adult. And I think it's our ego that ultimately gets in the way. You brought up a thing the other day of like our ego is not our friend in regards to safety.
Yeah, your ego is not your amigo.
Amigo, that's it. Yeah. I said the English version.
Yeah.
But that's what I experience, where there's something so incredibly powerful about being an adult learner and having to learn a new sport. We see it all summer long, with kiteboarding, with wing foiling, now stand-up paddle foiling. It's just like there are certain people who are just drawn to that frustration because they know that on the other side of frustration is unimaginable joy and fulfillment and reward. Do you have a similar experience with the inability to be a beginner, or at least a very solid mental obstacle of like, well, man, I can't suck at something, as being a deterrent for people?
I think that limiting belief of being a beginner again is a deterrent for people at times, even if they don't know it.
Right.
Meaning like, it's like an internal, it's like the little angel and the devil, right? When you're like, when you in the middle are like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And this little one saying like, well, you can't do that. Like, you don't know how to do that. And the other one's like, oh, you got this. And like, that, and I think people lean to that, like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's safer. It doesn't allow for failure. It doesn't allow for struggle.
Right.
And our body and our mind resist pain, struggle. We want comfort. We want security. Kiteboarding is none of that, right? You're by yourself. You're in, like we already talked about, conditions that you wouldn't really want to be in the water in. So there's a little bit of that, like, what happens if I don't have this kite anymore? Now I'm just a swimmer in this ocean or river or whatever, and like that's not comfortable to me. I'd just rather stay on shore, right? So I think that there's a lot more to it than there's a lot of unknowns that prohibit people from maybe just like allowing themselves to be a beginner again.
Yeah.
But on that same note, I think the people who choose to take that path, whatever sport you're doing that takes a good bit of effort and mental capacity and physical capacity, is, like you said, not only the joy, but the accomplishment, the sense of accomplishment, what that gives you inside, what you can then take to your work, another sport, your relationships, your parenting, your community, your job, whatever, fill in the blank with every individual situation. But like, you learn so much about yourself, what you're capable of, and then what you can then transition to other things.
Absolutely. You have just distilled my core thesis down to that. And that's exactly what it is. And I think a perfect way to wind down the conversation. But That's essentially what it is, right? You discover and learn so much about yourself. Like I used to use the example of like, if you know, struggle with like social anxiety. I use my son as an example. Nick, my oldest son,
He's amazing.
well, thank you. He is amazing. He's a
Yeah.
savage, and he used to struggle with social anxiety. He was the most awkward kid ever, and then he would be forced to go and ask people on the beach to give him a launch, and he would be forced to ask, you know, the older uncles like yourself, like, well, hey, how do I do this? How do I throw this trick? And then over time, he just blossomed into this. You know, he has a remarkable personality. Where he's a, you know, head lifeguard manager at the pool here in Hood River. He's conversing. He can speak. Kiteboarding and the lessons he learned from that translate into all these other life skills that are so like fundamental for people. I was talking to Jesse Richmond. It wasn't on our show, but we were discussing how his experience at Jaws like helped him with emotional intelligence, right? Like if you're going to go out and you're going to go out and push the limits at a space like Jaws, you have to be willing to have very real conversations with your loved ones, with your friends, and that brings about a level of emotional intelligence rather than just like blindly charging, you know, to ride 60-foot Jaws. And there's so many lessons. Well, yes, we can get them in other ways. We can, you know, find these lessons out through books or through, you know, through therapy or, you know, other forms of content. But when you're just out learning it, you're in the thick of it. And it's a beautiful, powerful lesson that can just be translated into so many other applications.
Well, you know, you mentioned and brought up what it did for you to sort of quiet or silence your mind or your thoughts, right? I think it took me a long time to realize this, but you know, kiteboarding, surfing, snowboarding, mountain biking, all these sports. I was a kayaker for a long time, but like I realized as I became an adult that like they allowed me to get into what was essentially a meditative state
Truly.
of presence, right? Which I didn't realize till later in life was a huge part of the draw for me, right? And still is. And I love that. I love that presence. I also love being old enough, both in years and just wisdom, to know when my head's not in it, to not push it and or take a break.
Yeah.
Today's not my day, you know, or today's not the day to do this certain objective.
Right.
And then for me, when I started kiting, I also had I like had a succession of traumatic experiences. I had a few automobile accidents that were vehicle rollovers. I broke my neck snowboarding. I had my girlfriend that I had been dating for 10 years pass away in a car accident.
Damn, bro.
I got hit by a vehicle. 4 of us got hit. 2 people died on the scene.
Wow.
And when I would go kiteboarding, all that would go away.
Yeah.
And not go away like it didn't exist, but all of a sudden I had this like clarity and I had focus and I didn't have the banter in my head of these horrible experiences or this trauma. And it was therapy. It was meditation.
Yeah.
It was a purpose to share that with others. It was all of these things wrapped into this like one amazing sport.
Yeah.
Right. But and again, the way you worded it resonated with me so much where I didn't think about it that way, but it would. Like once the kite left the ground, I didn't have a choice to like sit on the sidelines and sulk or mope, or like maybe when I could be having a bad day and I could go out and I might come back and still have a bad day on land or be sad or, be processing.
But for that time you were out.
Yeah. For those moments, I didn't have a choice. And because you can't just like kind of take a break, like you're still active, right? You're still, even if you're just chilling, you're still flying the kite, you're still making decisions, you're still solving these problems or puzzles in your head. To not have that time to just wallow in these things was so important in my life at that time and still is.
Yeah.
That, I realized that was like this driving force to put everything into it and to devote as much waking hours and time of the year and travel around and, it just, like you've said, build your life around, like the way people build their life around the sport. Like it happened sort of organically and naturally for me at that time, but it was so needed and so important of a point in my life that I don't honestly want to know what my life would have been like without it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, man. I'm sorry you had to endure those experiences.
I mean, that's just part of life. Like we all we're all given tasks, you know, that are thrown at us that we don't necessarily want or choose. Those just happen to be a few of my sort of traumatic things, but at the same time, I truly believe kiteboarding saved my life in a way. Maybe not that I wouldn't be here,
but you wouldn't. But you're living.
I wouldn't be me.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't be the me that's sitting here today.
Yeah.
I would be a different version of me. I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily even like to think or want to think what that version would be, whether that was an alcoholic, a drug addict, a miserable hermit that didn't want to be around people, whatever, you know, like I would like to think I wouldn't be those, but I'm not. I'm this, you know, person that's developed a career and a path within this beautiful sport that's now tied into in this water sport realm. Like I get to go surf Cloudbreak and I get to go explore these distant islands in the middle of nowhere in the Marshall Islands with like a really good buddy, Rio Stevens and Kiahi Dioboidis, where we guide these people in the Marshalls, or, you know, with a great friend who you know as well, Ben Wilson, with the stuff in the Motu. Like the places it's taken me, the people it's brought into my life, the richness and fullness of a life it's created is like far beyond what I ever thought it would be when I was handed the kite by Jeff Lagosche in a trade show hallway or convention center hallway in Salt Lake City in August of 1999, you know? Wow. And that's like that defining that moment to like this moment, I would have never been able to like write like if somebody said like write out your perfect scenario, like I think I far exceeded what I would have been able to even like put on paper.
I agree, man. That's amazing. I love that you bring up the kiteboarding saved your life. When I was a pararescueman, our guiding ethos is that others may live, right? That's the whole that's the whole guiding mission. That others may, you know, you're willing to sacrifice your life to save another. And when I left that environment, I still that was a part of my structural DNA, that others may live, except now living took on a new purpose. It wasn't just, you know, vital signs. It was encouraging and fostering life in people. And I started out with a lot of work with extreme sports and mindfulness. And the more research and study I did, I ultimately concluded that the path that I was really meant to go down was studying the neuroscience of flow state, optimal psychology. And I know you and I have spoke about this a lot offline, but everything that you described, you know, the need for struggle, that's all part of the flow cycle. And there's some tremendous work being done. There's incredible new research regarding the application of flow state and trauma recovery, which I'm kind of proud we were on the forefront of a lot of that research. Just didn't really understand what we were doing at the time, but we knew it was special. So yeah, like what you're describing, these neurochemical desires to struggle, it's ingrained in our survivability as a species, right? Like your brain rewards things like novelty, risk taking, shared consequence, clear objectives. Like that's what propelled our DNA into future generations, and it's still, you know, being shaped through like microevolution, and it's something that we can continue to witness as we become more globally conscious. And I definitely want to nod to the fact that you're a Patagonia ambassador. You know, one of the Warhammers over there at an incredible organization like Patagonia, who is doing incredible, meaningful work on a global scale. They have taken this stoke that you and I have experienced since we were kids and have found a way to like continue to provide globe changing, humanity influencing purpose for the better. And at the end of the day, it all goes back to Yvon Chouinard just wanting to surf. Like talk about like a commitment to your craft and to your path. So yeah, if you could just, you know, give us a few words on your experience with Patagonia.
You know, I say kiteboarding, you know, saved my life. And I think truly my relationship with Patagonia, or, you know, personal relationship and professional relationship, has also sort of extended my reach within the sport, but also my sort of purpose within the sport. And that's been phenomenal and just life changing. As a organization, I always looked up to Patagonia. You know, my dad is a skier, and we grew up in the mountains, and like would always read books on climbing and mountaineering, and you know, was always like you know, was viewed Yvon Chouinard as a hero. And I can remember still to the day, like the first time I visited Patagonia, when they asked me to come before I was an ambassador, but I was coming to visit and sort of see if I was a good fit and explore the campus. You know, he just said, if you meet Yvon Chouinard, tell him he's my hero. And at that time I did meet Yvon. I told him that, and 180 Degrees South had just came out, which is a movie and a coffee table book. And he grabbed one of the coffee table books and he wrote something to my dad and handed it to me. And, you know, I was able to give it to him that year at Christmas or whatever. But I was like, this guy is as real as it gets, you know. And in that first conversation, still at that day, I remember he was at his desk, and we were in the middle of a conversation. I'm kind of starry eyed, and a wetsuit designer walked in with a new wetsuit top, and he just stood up, ripped his shirt off, put the top on, simulated paddling, you know, said, oh, you know, I think this seam needs to be moved. And this seam, rips his wetsuit top back off, puts a shirt on, doesn't miss a beat, sits back down. And I was like, this company's real. Like, this is for real, right? And that's like a little simple thing, but a lot of companies aren't that, right? They have a face, they have a marketing team, they craft this story, they want people to know, and then there's like, what is the real story behind the curtain, right?
Yeah.
And Patagonia is the exact opposite of that. You know, the inflation vest for big wave surfing is a perfect example. You know, that was 10 years of development of money being lost every year, but the end goal was to help create a safer way for the athletes within the organization. But the bigger thing and the most impressive thing of Patagonia is nothing is really developed just for Patagonia. And I don't mean on a product side, meaning like a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a jacket. Like, obviously their designs are their designs, but product innovation, fabric innovation, equipment innovation is made to give to the industry and to the people, right? So the inflation vest was made to make big wave surfing not easier, not even safer, because it's not really a safe environment to be in. However, it was made to like mitigate some of the risk, right? And try to help save unforeseen and unfortunate accidents from being worse than they are, right? Yeah. And so that fundamentally is what Patagonia seems to bring to the table in all aspects. You know, we use Ulex rubber, which is a bio-based tree harvested sap rubber. Have, you know, sustainably harvested, you know, working with the Rainforest Alliance as like good stewards of the rainforest. But that was developed in conjunction with the brand that makes it, so that it could be given to the industry. Now there are other companies adopting that, and they're working them into their suits, right? We've been working on a project now for the past 4 years, which is trying to make all of the components of kites and wings now out of recycled and regenerative material. Wow. So that's 100% recycled fabrics, bio-based bladders, you know, non-petroleum options, non-toxic inks, non-toxic coatings. On the furthest end of that, it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't hold up to the harsh conditions. And now we're working our way back. What percentage of virgin can be woven in to make it strong enough? What, you know, how can we make the coatings less toxic or the inks less toxic, right? So we're working backwards from this sort of pinnacle thing. But, you know, Patagonia is not going to make kites. They're not going to make wings. We just wanted to make the industry a little less harmful or a little less harsh. So those are like just a couple examples of the commitment to bettering sort of the planet, but also taking these wonderful sports that we participate in and making them, you know, less damaging to our home planet, to our environment, and to ultimately us and future generations.
I've always been so inspired by that concept. It's just, you know, we've talked, you know, throughout the show about like building a life around these sports and that we love to do. And that's just the 100x version of ultimately just, yeah, I want to paddle out. But then it's like you start to, your sphere of knowledge and spiral of understanding of humanity and shared collective experience, you just look for opportunities to become more purposeful. I love that, man.
Yeah, example I was told about when we were working on some new wetsuit development a couple of years ago was a wetsuit meeting about this redesign. And Yvonne Chenard came in and said, I want us to reduce our water usage in producing wetsuits by 100%. So he wanted 0 water usage, and which is not really possible. There's just water in the process of dyeing and making fabric, whatever. But, and they said, well, that's not possible. He's like, well, I want to do it. And so he tasked the development team with a basically impossible task, but it forced us to, not forced, but allowed us to reduce our water usage by like 70%, right? Which is huge. So, and he probably knew that, but said like he sent the crew on this journey that prior to that we're just like, oh, this is what you do. You dye the fabric, whatever. And it was just sort of status quo. So like, he's just known for taking those, these sort of like, they're even called blue sky projects within Patagonia, which are these things that are so far out just into the blue sky. Like, can you get there? I don't know. But if we don't try, we're never going to know.
Yeah.
And I think the way that he's applied that to business, the way that trickles down, the way his son Fletcher does with kite surfboards, wing foil boards, prone foil boards, like, one of the things that I've seen recently is a lot of the big wave surfers that are on FCD, which is Fletcher Chenard Designs. They just did a big trip to Fiji last fall, summer, whatever it was, with some of our big wave surf crew, Cole Christensen, Ramon Navarro, some of the guys. They took 10 years worth of cloud break boards down there. Most surfers' boards don't last them a year or two.
Yeah.
And then I just saw a recent picture from that last Jaws swell YMA also broke. And it was another one of our surfers from the North Shore riding a 10-year-old FCD gun.
Wow.
Like a 10-2 or something.
I did just put in an order for an FCD gun.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what Fletcher is passionate about. And he's amazing in his gun shaping. But it's also this thing that like boards shouldn't just go in the dumpster. Boards shouldn't end up in the landfill. They should be able to last. So like the best performing board, if it only lasts 5 sessions, even if it's the best performing board, it's pretty wasteful.
Truly. Yeah.
Right? But if you can have a board that performs, incrementally, maybe it's a little bit, less than optimal, but you have it for a decade and you know how that feels under your feet, and and you're ready when the time is right and the waves are right, and you grab that go-to gun and you're not like have the new board nerves and you're solid with that thing under your feet, right? That's what his goal has been with his boards, right? And I have kite surf boards that are like that I've had for 5, 6, 7 years, and they're my go-to for big waves or for certain conditions. And I think that is, again, super commendable that, Yvonne YC's son has taken that, ethos from his father and the company that he grew up working around and with and for, and has transferred that into his boards. And now we're just expanding that into now the foil realm and the wind wing realm and all that stuff.
That's incredible, man.
Yeah.
Well, my brother, I could absolutely sit here and chat all day long. I think we should schedule a part 2.
I'm down.
But bro, what an absolute honor to like sit down with you today, to hear your story, the influence that we'll definitely focused on kiteboarding, the influence that kiteboarding has had on your life, and how you have been able to share that with so many other people and positively influence their lives. You're an absolute legend and a homie, and bro, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you for taking the time today.
Well, I really appreciate the giving me the platform with you to discuss this type of stuff. I think it's incredible what you're doing with the Session X podcast and your mindset coaching and training of others. And again, I think, you're doing a great service to the community and to the sports that we love. And yeah, absolutely love being involved. And really, it's an honor to be here.
Yeah. Jason Slezak, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
You.